Welcome to our weekly edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute. I'm Jonathan Hudson, and immediately I will introduce our guests for a very eventful day. Dr. Jonathan Schechter, a senior fellow at Hudson Institute, who formerly served as the senior foreign policy advisor at the Prime Minister's office here in Jerusalem. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Yaron Rosen, formerly the IDF Chief of Cyber Staff, an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot. And next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of Intelligence for Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. It's great to see you all. And I'd like to immediately start with you, Dr. Schechter. Today, Inauguration Day, which is, of course, the most significant aspect of what we are going to discuss. Nevertheless, we also shouldn't forget that before assuming office, President-elect Trump has already made a significant milestone in his anticipated 4 years, in which he brought about a hostage release deal with the three first hostages returning to their loved ones here in Israel after 471 days.
Yeah, it's quite extraordinary, actually, what's been happening over the last several weeks. Traditionally, it's said in Washington, there's only one president at a time, there's only one administration at a time, and I don't remember seeing this sort of cross-administration cooperation and effort to achieve some sort of diplomatic end, as we've seen over the last several weeks. Although I have to say, I think that as has been the case with a lot of the diplomacy surrounding hostages and other things going on around the region, there's much more that we don't know in the public space than we do. And I think it could be some time before we know exactly who did what. And there are already conflicting stories about the impact of what the Biden administration did, the impact of what the incoming Trump administration did, what it meant in terms of pressure on Hamas, pressure on Israel and on the prime minister. And at this point, I think we're going to be stuck with speculation. But the good news is that yesterday we saw these three hostages safely released and home with their families.
General Dr. Sofrin, I'd like to ask you, since the Mossad was a key actor within the long negotiations that ultimately culminated with the cessation of hostilities yesterday, what are we to take from the current first phase? And are you optimistic that the restart of negotiations on day 16 of the 42 days of a temporary cessation of hostilities will ultimately culminate into a second phase?
Let me say first of all, I think that everybody in Israel was very excited yesterday to see the three young ladies coming back from being held with Hamas on 471 days and smiling and looking fine, but you don't know what happens inside. Now, of course, we have so far the arrangement that within 42 days, 33 people will be back home. Most of them, I hope, will be alive, and some of them are already dead. But what will happen after the 16th day is a mystery, because Hamas will try to make manipulations and to force Israel for more concessions in order to release the rest of the people. Israel, on the other hand, Israel Prime Minister is caught in a dilemma, because on one hand, he wants the people to get back home. On the other hand, he promised the Minister of Finance, Smotrich, that the war in Gaza will go on. And will go on the question mark is when. When will it go on? When all the people will get back, or after the first phase? And if it happens after the first phase, that means that all the people that remain in Gaza, which is about 64 people, are doomed for who knows until when, and who is going to survive. So this is a great dilemma because on one hand, as I said, he wants the people to get back. And I believe that President Trump will apply pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu to go on for the second phase, and only then to consider if to go on with the war and not immediately after the first phase.
Indeed. Well, General Hossein, I'd like to hear your take on this, and to what degree is the current cessation of hostilities, other than being, of course, a welcomed return of a number of hostages, also a challenge, considering the fact that, on the one hand, many of the achievements that were made in the Gaza Strip that cost the lives of many very good men and women in the battle for those achievements, alongside the geostrategic climate that is rapidly evolving in light of the fall of the Assad regime, first and foremost, but also with Iran feeling increasingly with its back against the wall. Are we in a position to really achieve something more out of the current framework that exists at this point in time?
I think we have some very interesting geostrategic complexities coming up. This whole year plus or so, if we look at everything from a very high level, it all started with a huge Israeli failure. And Israel turned around and basically with a very successful military blow after over a year is completely changing the Middle East. Now, this is not saying that we're in the safe zone now. There's so many things that can happen out of this, the complexity of on the geostrategic level. I'll just mention a few. And Gaza, I think, is sort of a microcosmos of everything that's going on. You can look at Gaza as the tip of Iran, as an Iranian proxy, but you can also look at Gaza as the tip of the Qataris and the Muslim brotherhoods, the Brotherhood, and this, I think, is showing on what's going on after we completely changed the Shiite crescent and turned it and are turning it as we speak into some kind of Sunni crescent, right? We have changed all the Iranian proxies have been decapitated. The head of the octopus hasn't been decapitated yet, and that is one big thing that needs to be dealt with. And with that, another thing is developing here because Turkey is pressuring from the north and looking to spread its influence via Syria and Qatar. That's one type of Sunni crescent that we might see developing, and with quite a few risks to Israeli security in the long term. And on the other hand, you have the other Sunni crescent, which is something more like the Saudis and the Egyptians and the Jordanians that need a different structure of a security structure and different type of Sunni crescent that can balance the Shiite crescent that we're talking about. So all these things, I think, again, Gaza is sort of the tip of all these, and I'm not going to try to, forecast exactly how this is going to turn, but I'm afraid that without going into too much of detail, I think that one of the major things now is to use Gaza as the tip of the geostrategic strategy, the geostrategic level strategy, if you will, to try to test which side of the new Sunni crescent will invest in the future stability of the Middle East to counter the Shiite, the Iranian Shiite crescent. I think that's what we're going to see in the next few months or so. And the U.S. new administration will have to play a crucial role in shaping this very, very high level struggle.
There is much of history that can be brought in as an analogy to reality today, one of the perceptions that I find most interesting is Selim I, the Ottoman Sultan, or whatever you want to call him, in 1514, 1516. During this period, conquered Damascus on his way to ultimately defeat the Mamluks and then also take over the entire Levant, including Jerusalem and Israel for that matter. He initially launched a offensive against Armenia and the Persians, Iran, in order to diminish any option of weakening his back or his flank at that time, something that, of course, was always a modus operandi or a perception, at least, of the means of pursuing one strategy from a Turkish perspective if they seek to conquer the Middle East. That is something that is deeply concerning to moderate Arab states, since they remember history and they always look at the various nuances related to that. Dr. Schechter, what are we to take out of it?
Well, I think you don't have to go quite that far back, although it's certainly instructive. But you can go back to 2010, 2011, when you saw what they were calling at the time the Arab Spring, and you saw the rise of the Brotherhood in Egypt, and we saw how that went. We saw how quickly, at the time, President Obama turned his back on Mubarak. That was something that was not lost on any of the Sunni partners of the United States or now of Israel as well. And so I think there's great concern. I would say this though, with all of the setbacks that Iran and its axis have suffered over the last year and a couple of months, and they are significant. And I think we would all agree that none of us thought we would be in this position a year ago, where you had Nasrallah dead, Hezbollah with a huge percentage of its arsenal destroyed, Hamas not posing anywhere near the same threat that it posed, Iran's air defenses and apparently its missile capability. Everyone talks about how Iran and the Axis are on its back legs, but they're not rolling over either. And I agree with Yaron. I think that Gaza is it's an arena of competition and a challenge, not just for Israel and for its Sunni neighbors. It certainly is that, but it's also between these two visions, right? Between the Shiite Crescent and the forces led by the Muslim Brotherhood with Turkey and Qatar. And I think this is, in some ways, because it's such a broad challenge, it's also a broad opportunity, because I think there's a confluence of interests between Israel and between its Sunni neighbors. And if a year ago there was an open question, and I think we talked about this at the time, we said, this isn't an Israel-Hamas war. This is a war between Israel, the United States, and their Sunni partners and allies on the one hand, and Iran and its proxies on the other. And if Israel and the United States come out of this looking strong, then there will be partners there and there will be opportunities to do things moving forward. If Israel and the United States come out of this looking weak, then there won't be partners, and it'll be much harder, including for things like the day after in Gaza and so on and so forth. So here we are now with all of the things that have been achieved, but nobody's rolling over. And I think even today, even as we speak, they're still trying to determine who's going to look strong and who's going to look weak coming out of this. And you saw this yesterday during the release of the hostages. Hamas is trying to look strong. Hamas is trying to paint this as a victory. And even the Palestinian Authority, which nobody really talks about very much, but I saw them this week. They said, we are ready to step up and play our part in Gaza. So everybody is jockeying for a position now to look like they're coming out of this stronger. And I think that that's going to have a big impact moving forward on how this plays out and what the opportunities really are in the months and years to come, especially for the new administration.
Absolutely. Perception is key. And the fact that for a couple of years now, the United States was perceived as leaving the Middle East and pivoting eastward, as was repeatedly injected into all kind of narratives by adversaries, to put it plainly. Right
And by
now,
the United States.
well, the United States as well. Certain elements in the United
pivot was an
States.
American term.
Right. Well, the pivot was the term by the then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton with regard to Libya. It wasn't necessarily to the whole Middle East at large, and therefore there were misconceptions with regard to that statement that were then utilized for the advantage of basically disinformation, which was put forth by Iran, by China, by Russia, by other actors that are very keen on seeing the United States' role diminished in this world. But General Soflin, I'd like to ask you, since IDF Chief of General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, came out and stated that, yes, now we are on a defensive posture and preparing the ground for the various maneuvers within context of the outline portrayed by or agreed upon by Jerusalem and Gaza, for that matter. But nonetheless, the pivot, the Israeli pivot, needs to be towards the root cause of what ultimately culminated on October 7th, and that is the bolstering of terror elements in Judea, Samaria, and the Jordan Valley. And therefore, there's going to be a very significant campaign in those territories in order to eradicate terror elements that are posing a significant threat to the state of Israel. What can you tell us about that?
I think first of all refer to Gaza, because Gaza is still what we call a very disturbing issue for Israel, and Gaza is not done yet. And the fact that we succeeded in demolishing the military capabilities of Hamas, it's not enough, because Hamas is still there. You saw yesterday what we call the power projection of Hamas, as if, even though it's a little bit fake, but nevertheless, they're controlling Gaza. And the fact that they allow themselves to walk out openly with the weapon systems and uniform and so on means that they're not afraid because of the ceasefire right now. The future of Gaza is what we call a key point, because who is going to rule Gaza, it will have an impact on everything in the Middle East. That means that if Israel will insist that no Palestinian Authority of all kind will control Gaza, together with some other elements, that means that Hamas will stay there forever, and for the next, let's say, for the next coming years or even a decade ahead, it's going to be a risk for Israel. And we have to take care of that, even though we take precaution and we build some what we call perimeter and so on. But nevertheless, we have to keep an open eye and to make sure that they are not rearming themselves and rebuilding their capabilities one more time. On the other hand, the gravity now is turning into Judea and Samaria, because Judea and Samaria, even though Hamas tried to enlighten Judea and Samaria for the last year, on 2024, they didn't really succeed in what we call igniting some what we call a great fire within Judea and Samaria. And the fact is that they tried to do some action, some activities. Some of them succeeded, of course, unfortunately for us, and some of them did not. But if you look at the overall picture, that means Judea and Samaria is under control. Now, the fact that you release people to Judea and Samaria, people that have been imprisoned in Israel, and are being considered very dangerous people, with a lot of intuitism and a lot of desire to take back actions against Israel, that means that we have to apply more forces inside Israel to make sure that for Jordan Valley, nothing comes inside Judea and Samaria. I mean, weapon systems and so on that are trying to be delivered from the Iranian initiative through Jordan into through the Jordanian Jordan Valley into the Israeli side and to Judea and Samaria. And you see that each time that we get into an area and begin operating there, actually you're going into a small battle. You have side charges, you have people shooting, you have snipers, and you have anything else. And it's only a matter of time until you find out anti-tank missiles and so on, and anti-tank capabilities. I believe that it's going to be there very soon. And therefore, we have to invest now or to change the gravity into this area and to apply more pressure on Judea and Samaria and to try to unroot all these capabilities because they endanger the people that are living very soon. And we don't want to see another October 7 on the area of surrounding Judea and Samaria.
Absolutely. One thing that I am concerned about, and that is that the international community will be distracted over its demand to ensure security and stability, to forget its prerequisite for supporting the Palestinian Authority the way it should, and that is to reform the Palestinian Authority in a manner that will root out deep-rooted corruption within this entity. And it seems like despite repeated claims and urges for the Palestinian Authority to do so, there is no appetite to root out corruption for obvious reasons. With that being said, as Dr. Schechter also mentioned, the Palestinian Authority is seeking to show itself as a viable contender to take over the Gaza Strip. And just earlier today, there was a terror cell in Jenin, of one of the Palestinian terror cells there, that put a roadside bomb next to a Palestinian Authority vehicle, armored vehicle. It was utterly destroyed. So just to keep in mind, for the sake of our viewers, this is not only Israel versus those terrorist elements, but also the Palestinian Authority that is not really able to deal with the populations which are not under its control. They're under control of the Muslim Brotherhood or the Iranians or other foreign actors supporting them in their quest for various aspirations. They call it mukawama, resistance. Of course, it is much more than that. And similar goes, by the way, for Lebanon. The Lebanese file, it seems like everybody's very eager to get President Giuseppe Aoun into his role as president, to make it a success, including Nawaf, the new prime minister, who
Nawaf Salam.
Salam, indeed, who is the nephew of the famous, of course, Prime Minister of Lebanon, 4 consecutive rulings of back in the day. But nonetheless, General Wazen, I'd like to hear your take on this, because when we're talking about Lebanon, it seems like they're getting all those munitions, they're getting all those new funds, billions of dollars, lacking the prerequisite by the World Bank, by the International Monetary Fund for reform, in order to ensure that the corruption there will be taken out from the equation within Beirut's institutions. And it seems like that is no longer in the forefront of anyone dealing with Lebanon.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're asking this question, because I think we can go to Gaza actually to see how this might turn out in a few ways. I think it was back when we look at when Qatar got involved in Gaza. I think it was 2018, if I remember correctly. Gaza is a cash economy, and there was a cash problem. And this is the whole thing in Israel about Bibi's, Prime Minister Netanyahu's involvement in bringing in and building Hamas. That's the biggest story here. Like back then in 2018 and 19, Bibi thought to separate Gaza and Judea and Samaria. The Palestinian Authority was the evil, and Hamas was it was in charge of Gaza, but it was not yet that strong. And when Bibi brought Qatar and the cash into Gaza, it actually changed the currency from shekel to dollar. And people started to get their the power distribution changed. The dollars were very important because they were needed to pay the Egyptian its side as well for the smuggling of arms. And that is when, in the last 7 years or so, 7 to 8 years or so, that is when the real buildup of Gaza started. That is why we're looking at how the dollar, the change of currency, changes the influence. And if you look at Judea and Samaria, and same now with Judea and Samaria now vis-a-vis the lesser of two evils, the Palestinian Authority coming back into Gaza actually bringing back the shekel. So going back to the pre-2017-18 in Gaza. So we might get back some of the influence that we have in Gaza because we're going back to the shekel in Gaza. That is a very important thing. Now going back to your question into Lebanon, the building of influence is very complicated in Lebanon. Lebanon is three very different communities, and the question is who gets more influence. Gladly, we have the new president, the Marooni Christian president in place. So things are very different now. But the thing is, how do you support him for the long term and build a Western-oriented Sunni Christian, moderate Christian ideology political system versus, again, Turkey and the new Syria coming into Lebanon with its ideology. I think that's what we're going to see now. That's why things have to be quite fast when the new administration comes into play now, stabilizing Lebanon strongly with its economy, with an influence from the US, France, Israel, and from Saudi Arabia, reconnecting Judea, Samaria, and Gaza with the shekel, and bringing a positive influence into Gaza. Lesser of two evils, yes. Evil, but yet and still the lesser of two evils. That should create some kind of change on a higher level that might change all the directions in which some of these high-level currents are going these days. Super challenging.
Challenging is an understatement here, indeed. Unfortunately, we have come to a conclusion with regard to our time. I will mention, though, one point, and that is the fact that President Trump is taking office. There are, of course, considerations in the White House vis-a-vis Turkey. It is an ally, a NATO member state. It is on the right side of the equation when we're talking about Ukraine and Russia, and therefore it has plenty of leverage when we're talking about Syria and the Middle East, even though it's part of EUCOM and not CENTCOM. So there are still a lot of complications ahead, and we will deliberate all those in the weeks and months ahead. But with that, I'd like to thank General Sofrin, General Rosen, and Dr. Schechter for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition of Deep Dive featuring Hudson Institute, from here in Jerusalem, have a good day.